What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut, minimally edited podcast version of this week's episode. Today, we're going to tackle some big topics. Okay, so on the one hand, I absolutely love being a therapist. Like, best job ever, wouldn't trade it for the world. This is such a privileged job that I have. That's how I feel. And on the other hand, there is a lot that is wrong with our field. I think we know this, right? When I entered grad school, I didn't know this, but I also was 21 when I started grad school. But I also think societally, like, we understand this better now than we did in 2008. So we know this, right? The field is pretty messed up, but we also love this work. So there is some cognitive dissonance. Woo, 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 woo. And I carry that every day. So I thought we would engage with this dynamic, this tension, this dissonance by inviting you all to share what are some of the things that you would change about our field if it were up to you. And I put a poll on Instagram. I thought that there might be like a few major categories coming up, because that's typically what happens when I put a poll on Instagram. But there were quite an array of diverse responses. So we're just going to look at each of your replies anonymously in today's episode, and I'm going to sprinkle in some of my own thoughts, sprinkle in some pieces of information, let's say, I found on the internet. Some of them are more like research-based information, and some are like reading what y'all share on the Our Therapist subreddit because we love it so much. So that's what we're in for today. In the extended cut version of the episode, I'm going to add in a little extra sprinklings of my own little anecdotal stories, a little bit more information of like stuff I found on the internet in response to different items you all shared in this Instagram poll. So if you like the little extra rambles, you're in the right place. Okay, so let's just dive right into it. I put a poll on Instagram and asked, if you could change one thing about the field of psychology, what would it be? Now, when I put this out there, I kind of figured I wouldn't get a ton of responses because the more thought that's required to respond to an Instagram poll in my stories, the fewer responses naturally come through. Versus if I say like a very straight yes, no type of question, like, do you accept insurance in your practice or not? People don't have to think very hard, and you can say yes or no, and here's my answer, and I get a lot of responses. So in this one, I didn't even count my responses. I think I got 16 responses. Is that correct? Maybe 16 responses I didn't even count, which was actually quite a few considering that I asked this pretty heavy-hitting question and you had like a little teeny amount of space that you could put your answers. So thank you to all of you who responded, and everyone's responses touches on something different. So not a lot of repeats either, which was really interesting. With that said, the one thing that did have a few responses categorically under the same topic, which will surprise no one, is pay-related changes that folks would like to make. One person said, improving access to affordable care and rising private practice rates. Yes. Personally, if I had the magic wand and I could change one thing about the field of psychology, though I guess technically it's two things, it would be improving access to care for clients and also improving pay for therapists. Magic wand moment, if we could just change that, that would be awesome. And within the same umbrella of pay, another person said unpaid internships/payments, which I assume they are advocating to say that internships and placements should be paid if they could change that, which, yes. This is, okay, extended cut, folks. Here's my little ramble already. It's coming. Whenever somebody references this concern, which is a very real issue of therapists as trainees, as, pre-licensed therapists not getting paid, my mind goes to my full-time pre-doctoral internship, which, mind you, I'd already put in three years worth of placements and had literally thousands of hours clinically under my belt at this point. And I remember when I applied to this full-time placement, they proudly announced, this was in 2011, that they offered a stipend to their pre-doctoral internships. And I thought, a stipend. This place was 45 miles away, and I would have to drive there 5 days a week. I had 10 PTO days across 12 months, and that included taking a day off to defend my dissertation. I could trail off on the complaints. Anyway, they proudly shared that their stipend in 2011 for my full-time pre-doctoral internship was $300 a month. And I did the math, and that did not cover the cost of gas to drive there 5 days a week. I'm not done yet. Also, I was paying my school tuition to receive credits for my pre-doctoral internship, which I forget now if this was per semester or per year, but it doesn't matter because the math ain't mathing, and it was $3,000 to pay my school. Again, I forget if it's per semester or for the year, to just receive credit for showing up to my full-time internship. So yeah, the stipend and the tuition cancel each other out, and I'm still in in the red. Just make that make sense. Like, I had already trained for thousands of hours at that point, and I was making negative money. Like, it doesn't make sense. And I was working for a local hospital system. They were billing for my hours. Like, they were making a lot of money off of me, is what I'm trying to say. Oh gosh. Okay. End rant. So, needless to say, I agree with this sentiment. I think internships and placements absolutely should be paid. And obviously, we might not make the same amount of pay as we're going to make later once we're licensed, because we are working under somebody else's license by definition until we're licensed. But we should get paid for it. We're working. I don't. Okay. And listen, where does the money come from and how does it shake out? I don't know, but other professions figure this out, right? Okay. So I pulled up a Reddit post. We love Reddit. We love the Our Therapist subreddit. So just to kind of enhance our conversation that we're having today, here's a post on the Our Therapist subreddit from a year ago titled, "Was your internship paid?" They say, "I found it a bit alarming hearing about the amount of grad school interns who are not being paid during internship. Are the clients you're seeing being billed?" The answer is yes. "Are you conducting individual therapy, not co-therapy? Regardless, you should be paid, by the way." "Then you should be paid. I was actually the only student in my internship courses who was being paid." The top response to this post from a year ago, with 211 upvotes, says, quote, "My school considered it unethical for an intern to be paid." On what planet would it be unethical for you to be paid? Unethical. Like, I don't, how can you, who, there's nothing about that makes sense. It's one thing, though I'm upset about it, but it's one thing to say, I just don't have the money to pay you. It's another thing to say it's unethical. Like, where did you get that logic from? I don't understand. I'm not even going to try to understand. I don't understand. Okay, and then somebody actually asked that exact same question. I'm interested to know their line of logic, and then the person responds, quote, "I asked the field placement coordinator and she said, quote, most of these nonprofits would go out of business if they had to pay interns. She said that in front of my whole graduating class. Almost every student was upset except for one woman who was 100% on the side of unpaid internships for the same reason, that the company she worked for couldn't afford to pay even though interns were being billed for services. So a mainly female field is required to do free labor to prop up nonprofits, in my city at least." That's not our problem. I'm saying our problem. I'm not a trainee anymore, but like, speaking as a member of the profession, like, that's not our problem to uphold a broken system by just not being paid. Like, that's not our fault. So we should not be the ones to pay the price for it. If the nonprofits can't stay open without free labor, then something is wrong with the system that the nonprofit is working within. Anyway, blah, 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 blah. Oh, this episode has more responses and I need to get into them. Okay, let's keep going, Marie. Think calm, soothing thoughts. Okay, so regrouping, what's the topic today? Right, people's responses to my question, if you could change one thing about the field of psychology, what would it be? The last response in the pay-related category, someone says, earning the money across mental health settings we deserve for our level of training, education, etc. And I pulled up another Our Therapist subreddit post, and this person asks, how much are you getting paid? I'm just going to read their post. They say, hi, I'm an LMSW who graduated last year. I'm in New York City. I've been back and forth about going to my private practice because of the low pay. I know that starting off with no experience besides my internships, as well as only having my LMSW, I wouldn't be getting a high pay, but the pay is just so low for having a master's degree. Or am I expecting too much? I've gotten offers such as 25, 30, 35. This is dollars. I was at least expecting $40 minimum. I'm talking per session. And then they're inviting other people to share how much they made. People have different responses. Some people react like, whoa, that's way too low. But yeah, this is kind of just one more data point. Like, we're really not getting paid for our level of training, like especially if you're a post-grad and you're not yet licensed. To think, I don't know, in my city of San Diego, minimum wage just got raised to $17.50. And I see signs posted at, local fast food chains that they're starting at $20 an hour. I think I've heard that like a local grocery store starts at $25 an hour. And to think that you could potentially be working that job with no higher education, but therapists are carrying a whole bunch of debt. Most therapists are carrying a whole bunch of debt. It just doesn't math, right? Like to say like you're getting paid the same amount as somebody who didn't have to fork out any money at all for education. It doesn't make any sense. All right, well, Sassy Marie is here today. I think it's probably, I think you haven't gotten to see the full blunt force of Sassy Marie as private practice skills listeners, because I've spent pretty much all of private practice skills life, either pregnant, postpartum, pregnant again, postpartum again, and then perimenopause. And now I'm on some meds and I'm feeling great. I'm feeling like I'm 30. Amen. Hormones are very helpful if your hormones are out of balance. Wow. So this feels more like me, where I'm just gonna say some things, gonna express it. There's some energy behind it. If that's not your vibe, I get it, but this is me. Okay, so the next response to this question of what you would change about this field, someone says, much better training. There's a lot of terrible counselors out there. Oh, okay. I have two minds on this one, or maybe three or more. The frequency with which I hear new clients come in and tell me about genuinely awful experiences with prior therapists is way too much. Obviously, it should never happen. We hope it never happens ever, but it happens a lot. So there's truth in this. Another part of me goes, well, yes, but also most therapists are taught to be okay with being overworked, being underpaid, having way too many clients on their caseload, and it fosters kind of an acceptance of having poor boundaries, poor self-care. And I have to assume that at least sometimes for some therapists, that is going to bleed out into how effective your care is, how effectively and professionally you show up for your clients. So that's probably not going to account for all of the bad moments in therapy out there, but I'm aware that that is a variable at play out there that may influence how successful and effective therapy is. But then another part of me thinks back to grad school, or just, therapists that I met along the way, but specifically grad school with my cohort, and I won't name any names, but there were certainly people that I met in grad school that I thought, I would not ever want that person to be my therapist. And just telling the truth, that's how I felt. And, they graduated, they're licensed, they see therapy clients now, and perhaps they also have grown, we can hope. And maybe if I met them today, I would say, oh, I would totally be cool with you being my therapist. Not that we see our cohort as our therapist. Hopefully the way I said that makes sense. But it wasn't apparent to me in graduate school that folks who not just were like, obviously we're honing in our clinical skills and we don't have them all learned yet, but I'm talking about there's sort of like, there's some basics that we can start with on like day one or like week 2 of offering care, even as like a practicum student in our first year. Like we can show up on time. We can, non-judgmentally approach somebody who has a different perspective or experience or belief than us. Like there's certain kind of just overarching rules that I think don't require that much like textbook knowledge, but they're just sort of like healthy boundaries. If we don't know, we can always flag it and say, well, we're going to check in with our supervisor, right? There's a lot of ways to still be very much a trainee, but foster healthy therapeutic relationships. And there were a lot of cases where I wasn't even seeing that with some of my cohort, and it's not clear that they were getting feedback about that. So I don't know, maybe they were behind closed doors, but I'm not sure how much of that sank in. And there's not really any, like you can't fail someone out of grad school and licensure for, having loose boundaries or, showing up late to see clients consistently or falling asleep in session. I'm just talking about like, I heard way worse stories than this. These are just the rated G ones. So rated G, that sounds intense, but yes, I agree. And I have nuanced thoughts to it as well. But yeah, I think we need better training, but we also need a system that supports therapists once we get out. And also the emphases in our training, I don't think are necessarily like better, training around a particular theoretical orientation and more about like these really like basic elements of the therapeutic relationship and making sure they actually stick when we teach them to people. Okay, one person's comment just says medication. So I read that and it was one of those like head scratchers where I was like, what is it about medication that this person wants to change? Because I could imagine one therapist might say, we should totally get rid of medication. Another therapist might say, why aren't more therapists on board with medication? Like as a supplement or an alternative completely to talk therapy. Maybe they want to change the medication itself. So I don't know what this particular individual was referring to in their response, but medication is like a touchy thing. Like also, should therapists prescribe medication or not? That could be a whole side tangent. I know that I think it's already allowed in some contexts. I'll put it this way. I personally will not ever feel comfortable prescribing medication without some significant amount of additional training. So that's just my opinion for myself. But thanks to the Our Therapist subreddit, here's one person's commentary on this topic. A post from 7 months ago says, therapists who ethically oppose medication, ... And they say, I have met several practitioners and students who state that they are generally opposed to any and all medication for mental health. That's fascinating to me. Okay, let's see what they say. I know this has come up before here, but I just fail to see how one can operate in this field with that framework. I agree. Of course, over and incorrect prescription are serious issues worthy of discussion. But when people say that clients who need medication for any reason are, quote, lazy, etc., where are they coming from? It feels to me like a radical centering of that individual's personal experience with a painful disregard not only for others' experiences, but evidence-based practice. I find this so confusing. Any thoughts, explanations, feelings are welcome. Yeah, I have met therapists who are so anti-medication. And then the thing is, like, medication isn't going to be the cure-all for everybody. It's a tool. It's a tool, just like there's no one singular thing that's going to be the cure-all for anything, but we should equip ourselves with all the tools and be open to seeing which tools are going to be the most helpful fit for this particular client. Okay, so one person comments, in general, it's a red flag when therapists deal in absolutes for most things that are relevant to our field. Life is not black and white, so clinical practice shouldn't be either. Okay, this next comment touches on where my mind goes. They say, I would like to see anyone with this opinion work in an SPMI clinic. I don't know what SPMI stands for, But they say in parentheses, specifically working with people with severe schizophrenia for 3 months. Meds definitely have their drawbacks and considerations, but for some, it's the only way to live a peaceful life and avoid losing their freedoms through forced inpatient stays or incarceration. Yes, like there's so many contexts where if you just eliminated medication in a mental health care setting, like on average, it's going to wreak some havoc. Like the medications are doing something, though not perfect. Overprescribing is also a problem and all of that. But they have their place and we should be educated about that. And I'll say even not just in these sort of higher level of care contexts, but even with clients that, whatever the phrase is, like the worried well, I'll have clients where I'm working with them for a while and, maybe I have offered that if they ever want to speak to a prescribing provider about, whether medication could make sense for them or not, a lot of folks will have a like, no, I really don't want to take meds kind of reaction. And I respect that. But maybe after a couple of years, they, decide maybe it's worth a try. And for some folks, not everybody, but for some folks who maybe were relatively well adapted overall, medication's a total game changer. And I don't want to take that away from anybody to say like, you needed to talk to me longer rather than like cutting the line to take medication. Like that's not useful at all. Like if you feel better just by taking a medication, like awesome. I mean, I'm thinking about that now. Like I just started hormones for perimenopause and I feel amazing. And could talk therapy have helped me? Sure. But like also my hormones were out of balance and you put them back in balance and like my mood feels better and along with a whole bunch of other things. So like, I wouldn't want anyone to take that away from me either, Okay. But before we go on to the next comment, I'd like to thank Palbox for sponsoring today's episode. It wasn't until a couple years ago that I first learned that even with a signed BAA, Google Workspace and Microsoft 365 can't guarantee that 100% of the messages going in and out are HIPAA secure. So without a tool like Palbox operating on the back end, it's almost impossible to stay HIPAA secure unless you forego email altogether. Even if you exclusively use a secure portal to discuss protected health information with your clients, there's still going to be potential clients reaching out initially and also some clients who will still try to email you because, I don't know, they forgot their password for their portal and they're trying to reach out. So with a tool like Palbox, you can guarantee that every single message is protected. Palbox is super easy to set up and it's kind of a one and done situation. Like you just spend a few minutes initially setting it up and then it's just continuously quietly running in the background. Palbox offers a 14-day free trial to everybody and they're offering a special discount to Private Practice Skills listeners. Just use coupon code SKILLS at checkout in order to receive $250 off your first year of Palbox. That's Palbox spelled Paubox. Thank you again to Palbox for sponsoring this episode, and now on to the next comment. Okay, and then back to our original question about what folks would change about the field of psychology. Someone says, to make it more accessible, parentheses, cost/commitment for a doctorate. So I think they're getting at making it more accessible for like the therapist to become a therapist, which yes, absolutely. Let's talk about some statistics here because I find this fascinating. So I'll link to anything that I reference in the description below, so you can check these out as well. I found an article on psychology.org called 4 Steps to Becoming a Licensed Counselor. And they have this section that says, how long will becoming a licensed counselor take? And of course, it depends, but just referencing what they say for a mental health counselor, it says 6 to 8 years. Yes. I wish people talked about this more because, if let's say you are getting a master's level degree, maybe you're going to a 2 to 3 year program to get that degree. A lot of people don't talk about like, you basically have to consider your post-grad pre-licensure years as part of your training. Not basically, that is all part of your training. And that usually takes more than just a year after you graduate. So you have to factor in you're in a 2 to 3 year program, or if you're getting a doctorate, it's a 4+ year program, or if you're doing it part-time, however long. And then you also have your pre-licensure postgraduate years. So yeah, it's not unusual for it to take 6+ years to get licensed for the whole thing. The whole shebang, which for a lot of people, I mean, even going to grad school for 2 years is asking a lot, but to put your life on hold for 6 or 8 or more years to pursue a degree and licensure, it's a lot. That's a lot. That's almost a decade. And of course, it's not just time spent, but money spent. And student debt for therapists is so high on average. Referencing some information from studentloanplanner.com, they say on average for a mental health counselor, so master's in counseling degrees, the student loan debt tends to range from $40,000 to $80,000. And I'm a psychologist, so to throw this in the mix, according to studentloanplanner.com, the average psychologist has $224,000 in student loan debt, and some have had it as high as $500,000. $500,000 of student loan debt. If that's you, sending you all my love and tender care. Wow, that's a lot of money. And you might say that like going to grad school is expensive no matter what training you have, but keep in mind, most expensive graduate careers have a correspondingly significantly higher income so that you can reasonably anticipate being able to pay off your student loan debt. And therapists aren't afforded the same luxury. So we got to do it somewhere. You pay better later, make it more affordable to get in, less time. It's not working the way it is right now. All right, and somebody else answered this question saying, for self-care not to be a buzz term, but actually valued. Yes, I have a high horse about this. I have a whole video, I think, from not too long ago where I talk about this. I'll find the link and link to it below if you want to dive into it. To sum up some of what I get to in that episode, I think an issue that happens with self-care is we see it as like stuff that you do after work, like take care of yourself after work. But self-care really needs to happen in work, like while you're at work, with healthy work environments that are supportive, genuinely supportive, and not overworking therapists with way too many clients back to back or just massive caseloads and productivity quotas. There has to be enough paid time off and enough pay, honestly, as part of your self-care. I think for a lot of therapists who struggle with self-care, if you offered them just those things, they may not feel like they struggle so much with self-care. It's not just like, take some time for yourself, R&R. At the end of the day, it's like, how can you create an ecosystem of your life where it feels sustainable and it includes both the workplace and your personal life to make the self-care happen? All right, and the next comment somebody gives to my question about what they would change about our field is the need to label everything and then quantify as good, bad, normal, or abnormal. Yes. Yeah, definitely like the medical model is fully at play when it comes to therapy. And I have that sort of two minds thing with this one again, where I think if we completely threw out all of the medical model, we would start to lose something. But I think if we go too far into the medical model and then the labeling starts to turn into good and bad, and then the stigma that's already there that we're trying to eliminate if possible, when sometimes it's more helpful even to just think of things as like averages and like how much does this person deviate from the average and how do they experience their life? Maybe how do they experience it differently than the average? And so what adaptations make sense for this person? I mean, that could play out for any number of things, not just, DSM-5 mental health diagnoses, just like how are some of the ways that you experience the world and interact with yourself and everything around you? Like, how does that impact you? And what adjustments are necessary to optimize the potential for you to thrive? Then if we take that lens, then, it feels much more like possible to help somebody. And sometimes labels can't help to that goal. And sometimes we use labels when we don't need them. I had an episode about whether it's helpful to diagnose our clients or not and kind of dug into another Reddit post about that. So I'll link to that episode below. And on a bit of a similar thread, somebody commented, the understanding of diagnosis. Diagnoses are more complex than yes or no. For example, ADHD. Yeah, I think it's slow, but there's some movement to the idea that things happen on a spectrum, and some diagnoses are kind of having that embraced more than others. Ooh, here's another comment. I mean, this does touch on pay, but from a specific angle, somebody says, federal mandate for insurance reimbursement rates to increase and add yearly raises. So I think they're saying, if I could change anything, I would make it federally mandated for insurance to not just reimburse, but like reimburse at a certain rate, maybe like how we have mandated minimum wage. And also to increase and add yearly raises, which, yeah, makes sense, should at least pace with inflation and perhaps also increase with experience level and things like that. Agreed, that would be amazing. And it is possible to ask insurance for a raise directly, even though it's not federally mandated and they can say no. And so I'll link to an article on theinsurancemaze.com that just says, our raise is possible. And she offers some tips for how to ask insurance for a raise effectively. So I will link to that article below if that's something you're interested in. Okay, another comment somebody gave for what they would change about our profession is that they would have therapist programs be more specialized, kind of like medical programs. For example, urologists, OB, etc. Yeah, that one, it's kind of interesting, right? Because in the medical model, if you're getting an MD, you still start at med school, and the med school training is the same across all MDs. And just like with therapy training, you can specialize a bit based on like where you lean into your research, or maybe there's a few places where you can like try to get into certain training rotations if there's a special interest that you have. But it's not until after you graduate and you do your residency that you do your specialized training, which would be the therapist equivalent of, your intern years, postgraduate, and pre-licensure. So you could use that same framework, but even though doctors in residency are still underpaid, they are still paid a lot more than therapists in those trainee years post-grad. So it might just be that like the opportunity for specializing could happen in those post-grad trainee years for us as well. But that does sound like a lot more work and more expense. And I think it does make sense to have programs that are a bit more specialized. I mean, I think some are, but that's not necessarily like standard. I think a lot of people are getting a more general clinical degree and then developing an emphasis later with extra credentials and things like that. Okay, another thing somebody says is a sole therapist can't make someone change. They left it open-ended. There's a lot of ways that that could play out. Do they want a team of care providers? There could be a lot of ways of exploring how to implement that. But yes, a sole therapist can't make someone change. I would agree with that. Even the phrasing of that, make someone change. I don't ever feel like I am at all trying to make anyone change. But I do feel like there's more of a sense of like being the Sherpa, which I hope I don't totally misspeak about the role of a Sherpa, but my understanding is that a Sherpa will act as like an expert guide for somebody who's already on a certain type of trek. Like you're already trekking up Mount Everest. You have decided, and you are putting one foot in front of the other, but you may not totally know the way up. You may not know what sort of pitfalls to watch out for. And you may get lost. And a Sherpa is going to come alongside you. They're going to help you carry some of your stuff. They are going to show you the way, and they are going to be a support for you as you are the one putting one foot in front of the other, climbing up Everest. But yeah, if you're sitting on the ground, like, I don't really want to climb up Everest right now, like the Sherpa is not even obligated to try to convince you to do that. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Let me know if you ever feel like you want to climb up Everest and we'll chat. And that's kind of how I approach therapy. But with that said, like, you might say, well, okay, somebody says they want to climb Everest, but you probably need not only a Sherpa, but like a vehicle, and you need like special harnesses, and maybe the therapist is the Sherpa, but you need like a whole team of care providers or systemic change or whatever else in order for that person to make it up Everest. That could be a perspective some people hold. And I think that is true in many cases for a lot of situations, that folks will seek care from one therapist, and it's sort of like, yeah, they need more than just a therapist to help them, even though they're more than willing to put in the work. And in other cases, individual therapy can be really effective by itself because I see it as helping a client unlock their own fullest potential, their own ability to advocate, to then reach out if they need social supports, to go and find them, advocate for them, access them, and on their own, without me doing it for them, build some structures around them that will help them stay supported so that I can say bye-bye and they will still have everything that they need. Another person says notes. So again, it's left to our imagination, like what would this person change about notes? But it's no secret that most therapists hate documentation. I'm really curious to see how this changes with the advent of AI. It's obviously new and, we're working out the kinks and then concerns about data and all understood. But, I'm just so curious if we could fast forward 5 or 10 years, what would documentation look like? And would it be totally different? Like genuinely, I just showed up to my primary care physician's office to talk about perimenopause a couple months ago. And she didn't have to document her notes. She had an AI scribe do her note for her. So, ethical dilemmas and all of that. I'm just going to skip over all of that, but just to say there's technology that can do your notes for you now. And I imagine it will only get better over time. So I'll be curious to see how that changes. Okay, somebody else says they would change the competitiveness and putting down of therapists by other therapists. This has been a problem. It still is a problem. And my little reaction is like, why are we still doing this? And I have to admit, I was sucked into this mindset in grad school. And I think it was for me, it was a reflection of my own unhealth. Please don't hear that as me saying that every therapist who's competitive, it's a sign of their unhealth. But I know for me, I felt really insecure and like I had something to prove. And so sometimes, I hope it was just sometimes and not all the time. I hope people who know me from grad school, if you're watching, I'm so sorry for whatever weird things I did. But there's a pull for it. Like I have to prove myself or belittle someone else, which is awful. Let's not do that anymore. I pulled up an Our Therapist thread talking about this where somebody says, what's up with the hostility towards each other in our field? I'm in a few therapist Facebook support groups. Oh yeah, the Facebook support groups, it's so for real in there. People can be real sassy. Okay, that was my commentary. They go on to say, some of it is really helpful as I'm newish in private practice. I've asked a few genuine questions and even prefaced it with, quote, I understand this may not be the correct way of doing XYZ, so that's why I'm asking. Without fail, many therapists will comment rude or unhelpful things. Quote, why would you do this? I literally said I need feedback. Luckily, I'm about to join a licensed consult group and potentially just leave the support groups, but I'm curious as to why this is so common in our profession. The top comment has an interesting take. They say, I've seen this a lot too, and I think it's so tough. My personal thinking is that we, as therapists, are often called to the profession due to our own need to feel helpful. I'm going to raise my hand up high for that. Understood, and I relate. It is the need and the sense of deriving our sense of self-worth from this ability that creates an immense vulnerability in our confidence. If we're dependent on succeeding at helping in a field that makes this very hard to determine, that doesn't have many hard and fast rules, that's about relationships, we can become very defensive when we feel threatened. We also cling to a sense of doing things right, and an easy way to reinforce this to ourselves is by attacking others. If others are doing something a different way and we haven't found our self-worth in something more rooted in ourselves than our work, we become reactive and lash out. And they share a few different thoughts, and they go on to say, once we focus more inwardly and let go of trying to influence people as a source of our self-worth, we can hold space for being wrong or allowing others to practice differently without judgment. I like that. Thank you for posting that. That was very articulate, and I think put some words to things I was thinking without being able to articulate it. No, yes. And that was me. That was me. And maybe sometimes it's still me. I think I can definitively say less so than before at the very least. I can never promise it's eliminated. Okay, this is an interesting thought somebody shared, and I'm curious if others feel the same way. So they respond to this question of what they would change about this profession by saying, it is so secularized and tolerance and acceptance of all things, it seems, except for people of faith. I imagine this might be one of those things where it kind of depends on your context, the demographics where you live, things like that. But my thoughts go to a few memories of my own. And one that comes to mind first is a memory from my very first practicum placement in grad school, my first year at a crisis house, where I remember sitting in group supervision, or maybe it was a staff meeting, but the supervisor was saying that, often religion is very helpful for clients' mental well-being and all of that, and citing some statistics. And so she was sharing, like, even though she's not religious, and she doesn't push religion on her clients, hopefully, that she finds it important that if a client is leaning into religion, that she finds ways to advocate for that, to support that, because it helps their mental health outcomes, even though she doesn't ascribe to those religious beliefs and values. And I was curious about this because I remember that stat from when I was in grad school in general and wondered if it was still like held up in the literature. And I found this article from APA's Monitor on Psychology from 2023, so a little bit more recent, titled, "Can Religion and Spirituality Have a Place in Therapy? Experts say yes." And then it goes on in the subheading to say, most psychologists have little training on addressing spirituality and religion in therapy, but these resources can be a source of strength during challenging times. I'm not going to go through the whole article. I'll link to it below if you want to check it out. But yeah, it seems like it still bears out in the research that religion and spirituality is a supportive variable when it comes to, supporting mental health symptoms and all of that. But I can kind of see it from the other side of things, where folks who are filled with some ill will, or, have some malicious intent, or maybe they're not even aware of their malicious intent, but they have some proneness towards unhealth, may leverage religious contexts, whether it's like religious organizations or religious beliefs, as justification for their own unhealthy or harmful behavior. And the religious system can sort of uphold that behavior without calling it out, depending on the context. And I've witnessed this happen firsthand many times. And I walk with a lot of clients through the experience of like deconstructing spiritual abuse who've been through religious trauma as well. It's both. It's both. A healthy religious context can offer support, and maybe even for those clients who went through religious trauma, their religion may also support them at the same time. It's very nuanced, but I'm curious. I'm not speaking to what this individual is bringing up, that they're saying that therapists are not tolerant and accepting of people of faith, which is an interesting perspective, and I could definitely see that being a thing, but I'm wondering what they mean specifically, and it probably just depends on the situation. The other story that came to mind when I read that comment was back in undergrad. I was asking a professor that I was doing a research assistantship, or forget what it was called. I was doing research with a professor, and I was asking him for a letter of recommendation, and he asked for my resume and everything. And then as a college student, I was very, very involved in a religious organization on campus. And so that was on my CV on my resume, amongst other things. And I remember we were chatting as he was getting ready to write my letter of recommendation. He was like, "Oh, I see that you're part of this religious group. I didn't know that you're a Christian." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I put that on there because I'm really involved. There's a lot of leadership and all of that that it entails." And he, I'm paraphrasing now, but he said something along the lines of like, "Oh, I didn't know that you were a part of that because you're so smart." And I thought, wow, well, you just kind of put it all out there, didn't you? The idea that if you're smart, then religion can't be part of the equation is a misconception that I have experienced, especially amongst, I'd say, academics in general, not just therapists. And kind of the more academic and research-based the context, the more I've seen that personally. So that's fascinating to me, that those two things seem to not go together, even though there are definitely religious people at all levels of academic rigor, I guess. I don't know. What do you think? it's a head scratcher for me. It just makes me think without really having the answers, but it's a helpful thing to think about and make sure we're being inclusive to our clients of all backgrounds, including people of faith. And then the last response to my question, somebody says they would change medical necessity for insurance reimbursement. Oh, if we had the magic wand, that would be so nice. Ooh, I I don't know that I have too much to add directly, but I will just read a quote from this NPR article titled "Insurers Can Restrict Mental Health Care. What Laws Protect Patients in Your State?" This is from August 2024 from NPR, which, I'm not even going to trail off on their funding getting cut, but let's just say I am someone who consumes their reporting. Okay, quote from this article. Insurers generally face few limitations on how they define what kind of mental health care is medically necessary. They often create their own internal standards instead of relying on ones developed by nonprofit professional medical societies. These standards can then be used to challenge diagnoses or treatment plans. I'm already alarmed just reading that. I mean, we know that, but it's still alarming. Quote, knowing the profit motive that insurers have, it's really shocking that federal law doesn't define medical necessity and require the use of nonprofit guidelines to make decisions, said Bendet, who helped California legislators draft a more robust law that passed in 2020, becoming one of the first states to do so. Of course, this article is about kind of state-specific laws in place. So if you're curious about that, I've linked to the article below. But yeah, there's no federal regulation on like what insurance can cover. Shouldn't say no. It says they face few limitations on how they define. Yeah, the whole thing. I have so many thoughts that I'm just going to share none of them because it could be its own episode. But yes, I agree with this person's comment. Whew. Well, this was a ride. I feel like I was really happily surprised with how diverse the responses were, though also sad because there is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that we would change about the field, and I'm sure there's more. Feel free to leave a comment on this episode about, what if you had the magic wand and you could change something about our field, what would you change? Because I think there's more. At the very least, we should know what the limitations of our field are to the best of our abilities, and of course, if there's anything that we can do to advocate for change, may we do so. I find this a fascinating topic in general to sort of be in a field and critique the field that you're in. Because there are a lot of things wrong with the field of psychology, in my opinion. I'm curious if this could be an interesting series. I've always been interested in leaning more into interviewing other folks, other therapists in particular, and I've only just barely dabbled in it here and there because I need some kind of structure or format to go off of, and I kind of wonder if it might be an interesting question to ask other therapists what they would change about our field. So if that's interesting to you, if that's like a series that you'd like to see, let me know. I can't promise that I'll definitely do that, but I'm just sharing that that's like an, not fully baked thought that's in my mind. Well, I had fun making this episode, and Sassy Marie definitely came out, so hope you didn't mind that. I hope you found it helpful and maybe even illuminating, empowering, validating, whatever you might be needing in this moment as you hear others share what they would change about our field. Well, I feel like I went on a journey with this episode. I don't know if that felt like a journey to you. Maybe it's just that I've been sitting here for a really long time. I need some lunch. On that note, wherever you might be at and whatever you would like to change about our field, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.